Let's unravel Geeta's world.
Hello, welcome back to Geeta's World. This is our 117th episode, though it's only my second episode in this chair as host. Of course, this is a show where every week we sit down and break down the biggest story of the week with Geeta Mohan, the foreign affairs editor of India Today, also my boss. So I have to be very nice to her.
No, he's not nice to me. You will see in the course of time and the episodes how much we argue over anything and everything.
That is true. We do that, but we mostly keep it off camera.
It's a democratic newsroom.
That is true. But so this week, as is the flavor of most weeks these days, is Donald Trump. And more specifically, I think I wanted to talk a little bit about China and this relationship between the United States and China. Donald Trump has this reputation of being very, very difficult on China. Just today, he slapped a 10% tariff on Chinese goods. But a lot of conversation coming in that actually Donald Trump might be considering a broader deal with China across the board, whether you're talking about Ukraine, you're talking about Taiwan, you're talking about trade. He's someone who's actually very open to working with China. And if that deal sort of materializes between the United States and China, what does that mean for countries like India that have done so well out of this tension between the United States and China? So I wanted to ask you, what are you making of Trump's approach to China, his first week in office? We've seen this 10% tariff. How should we make sense of what's happening?
See, I think to begin with, let's just talk about tariff, and then we'll talk about the geopolitics of how diplomacy is playing out between U.S. and China. In terms of tariff, this is brinksmanship by Donald Trump. We have seen this in the past as well, when he slaps tariffs or a unilateral decision on a country and then pushes them to the negotiating table. We've seen that with India as well, all through the trade talks. And we're seeing that with Mexico and Canada. But look at and you're right in saying so, look at the tariffs that have been levied against Mexico and Canada as opposed to China.
Right, 25%. Exactly.
Each, and 10% here in China.
For China, exactly.
During campaign, he said 60%, and it has come down to 10%. Right. So there is a massive shift, despite having Waltz as National Security Advisor, Rubio as Secretary of State, both hawks when it comes to China. There is a massive shift, and that shift is... might not go down well for us, Shashank, because like you said, it works well for us to be the card when US wants to counter China, right? To be that opposing country in the region. Right. But it works well for America. He's being pragmatic. Right. If there is any way forward where he does not want tensions with the most troublesome nation and is okay creating trouble with others who are not really in the strategic sphere of Beijing, right, that makes sense for them. So yes, he's being pragmatic, but in the long run, I do see trouble and challenges for India. Challenges because Xi Jinping's approach towards China is not changing anytime soon. We've seen the news and covered the news of this whole disengagement, but withdrawal still has not happened.
Got it, right.
So it's going to be very difficult.
Right. If I can ask you, just if you could start us off with this, right? I think a lot of people have that sense of, okay, Donald Trump, when you think of Donald Trump, you think tough on China, right? This is the reputation he built over 4 years in government. Perhaps that shift of America becoming so much more competitive towards China began after he took office as president. You were around covering a lot of that relationship in those 4 years. How exactly did he acquire that reputation of being this tough on China leader? Because he began by trying to invite Xi Jinping in 2017 too. He went to Beijing, met Xi Jinping. They had this wonderful summit, and then the tensions began, and then he acquired this reputation of being tough. What happened there? Could you lay down that story of how Trump became the tough on China leader?
I think every time he starts, and every time meaning just the second time. No. It was just the first time we had experienced Trump in office. But I think what he wanted to do, firstly, Shashank, and we discussed this earlier also, that when the first time around he became president, he did not come with one experience. Right. Second, a team. He was quite lost. Correct. He was trying to get people who knew what they were talking about. He was trying to get people together.
But not his people, right? They were not his people.
One, not his people. The transition was very difficult. There was so much resistance. He was being decent with that resistance as well. This time around, look at him. Look at Pete Hegseth. He's removed all the so-called woke
Generals and
journalists
Right.
from the Pentagon pool. And the ones who are pro-Trump now are in that. Now, the explanation is that there is a rotation of journalists so that everybody gets an opportunity to be in the Pentagon pool. But he's done that. They don't care.
Right.
And it's all right because we've seen this happen in most of the countries today. So you can't just look at one country and say, how dare they or why? Their prerogative, right? It might not be right. It's never right to muzzle media or for media to self-censor. But we're seeing that happen in America as well. Having said that, so we've seen that change this time around, right? He's come, and yet he's pragmatic, and yet he's being very careful with China.
Right.
So in the beginning, he came thinking that he should start, and he's a businessman, start with engaging China in a way that it profits the United States of America.
Right.
But in the long run, when you saw the kind of, and they've had a massive, massive war at the WTO as well.
Right. Trade
When
and
it
so
comes
on, yeah.
to trade and tariffs again. When you see that in many places, China was assertive, was aggressive, and was not playing ball, is when you started seeing an interference. There was so much to do with interference, Chinese problems, the trouble. Major part of the conversations on Indo-Pacific and Quad did actually happen during Obama and Biden as well, but did happen during Trump administration. And you saw that entire equation amongst these countries who do think China as a threat come together in a way that Trump did start believing that there is a major problem.
Got it.
And what did we see? We saw very, not a smooth, but a slow, yet a realization that led to sanctions. Trump did sanction China, Chinese companies, Chinese officials during his regime. Again, not as much as we've seen it happen during Biden regime, but he did do that.
Right.
And I think that has to do with the fact that this is not a China of the past. This is not a Deng Xiaoping China. This is not a Hu Jintao China. This is a Xi Jinping China. And Xi Jinping's China looks very different from any other China of the past. Those leaders were more pragmatic than America because it was a growing power. They knew their limitations.
They had to cut compromises.
They
and so on.
did, and they did anything to become an economic powerhouse.
Right.
And starting from Deng Xiaoping and Hu Jintao as well. And they managed that. With Xi Jinping, when he came to power and where he's brought China, they're already very powerful. They're already in a position at a place where they don't have to play ball anymore. They don't have to compromise. They compromise where it's needed. So they will meet.
Right.
Would you have ever imagined an American president inviting the Chinese president and the Chinese president declining the invitation in the past?
Right.
Xi Jinping didn't care.
You know, if I could ask you something on
But
this.
he
though.
sent his vice president.
Right, Han Zheng, right.
So he's sending representation, only saying that, we
We're
want...
interested.
Yeah,
There
we're
could be something
interested.
there.
And we will represent ourselves. But I don't think the event is big enough for me to be there.
Correct.
And if you see how the event was managed, well, I'm, in a way, for the Chinese, I'm glad he was not there. Standing at the back row on the dais, on the podium, made no sense.
Right. Could
They
I ask you-
just did not manage their inauguration well when it comes to international guests.
You know, could I ask you this though? This question about what happens now. You know, there is a sense that, all right, Trump comes to office and says that when he's on the campaign trail, he says, I'm going to slap a 60% tariff, as you were mentioning, on Chinese goods. I'm going to make them pay. I'm going to be very tough on China. You know me. This is my brand. Then he comes into office, and one of the first things he does is he gets on call with Xi Jinping, the president of China. And he says, look, the United States and China can work together towards furthering global peace and stability. And people are surprised. That isn't Trump's brand. He said we could work together on trade, on TikTok, on the trade of drugs. People are saying, okay, that seems like something of a positive agenda. And now you're seeing some of the reporting coming out of China as well. After Xi Jinping was invited, apparently, reportedly, to Trump's inauguration, China's vice president went, and people are saying, okay, this is a shift in tone from the Trump administration. And China's responding as well. Because they're saying that, look, yes, Trump may be tough, but Joe Biden for 4 years was ruthlessly focused on the issue of China. He said, look, you are a democracy. We are a democracy. You are an autocracy. You are trying to export your authoritarian model around the world. We are democratic. We're a democratic state. We want to spread democracy around the world. We just don't agree on these issues. You're threatening our allies like Taiwan, like South Korea, like Japan. There is just fundamentally a major problem between us. And he steadily ratchets up the pressure for 4 years in a very focused and disciplined way. Now you have Trump, who doesn't very much care about spreading democracy abroad, doesn't really care that China is really that authoritarian.
It's just about how they project themselves.
Correct, exactly.
I don't think Biden administration cared either. Look at the countries he engaged and the statements he made at those bilateral press
But
conferences.
let me put my point forward, and then I'll let you, of course, push back. Which is that, and then Trump comes in and says that, look, I see our allies as moochers anyway. I don't really see Japan and South Korea really helping us. I'm not that interested in defending Taiwan. I don't want to spend money on these foreign wars. And on everything else, I'm open to a deal. And so the reporting coming out of China increasingly is that the Chinese government thinks that, look, there is a deal to be made here with this gentleman. We can have a trade deal. We can have something on. We can give him support on Ukraine to end the war. And he can back off on Taiwan, which is what he wants to do anyway. That seems to be the outline of the deal. So that I'm going to push this now towards you and say, how likely does it seem? Am I getting something wrong here? Does it seem like there seems to be something that, okay, look, the winds are shifting in favor of a deal between the United States and China that sorts out and reduces a lot of these tensions? What do you think?
Very well-placed argument.
Thank you.
But Biden was not focused on China. Biden was focused on China only to the extent, which is why the Trump criticism came along all through the 4 years. Biden was only focused on China only to the extent that they thought it was hurting American interests and how to contain China, not to beat, not to put China down or show its place. Why? Because Biden was focused on Russia, which is what Trump kept saying, that you're focused on the wrong country in the wrong place. Look at the sanctions. Look at how many Russian, of course, because of the war, but nonetheless, Trump's argument was that please focus on China. The more you focus on Russia, the more you're giving space to China to grow, expand, and you're bringing them closer. You're bringing Russia and China closer, which doesn't work for America. It certainly didn't work for India because... and it did because we did see the conversations that took place, the telling photograph of Putin, Xi Jinping and Modi. So Putin bringing them together. I mean, who would have thought, right? So this RIC still is functional despite China and India being so dysfunctional. Coming back to the topic. So, no, they were very focused on the war. That gave China a lot of space. So every now and again, slapping a sanction doesn't help if you're not going to be focused. Is Trump losing focus now that he's in power? He's not losing focus. But I think what's happening is that look at his core team. There are divergent views within the core team itself. You have Rubio, Waltz. You have the chief of staff who's now trying to stop Elon Musk from entering or having access, according to some reports, to Trump. And you have Elon Musk, who is very clear that if you don't have China on your side, you're playing you're fighting a losing battle.
And he has an economic interest there as well. I mean, Tesla is so dependent on its Chinese markets. Exactly, right.
Not just market aside. It's the source. Your resource, your source for running Tesla is lithium, and that comes from China. so entrenched are business interests between China and Elon Musk's every project because of the rare earth metals and lithium component, is the reason why he's been very, very clear that if you don't, and see, in the longer run, Shashank, China controls most of lithium across the world. You have to be pragmatic. You can't say, I want to go electric and then say, I want to, you can compete, but I want to rival China. I want to be a rival of China. You can't. There has to be a middle path, right? And I think Trump is listening to all sides and taking a call.
Got it.
Where is he taking a call against China? Panama, where he says their military office. I think he's playing to his constituency because there are no military, or according to reports, which Panama says there are no
Dual-use
soldiers. No,
capabilities,
there are no soldiers
Yes, there
on
are.
the
There are
ground.
at this point, right?
There are no soldiers, but that's what Trump said. So he's trying to counter Chinese influence in these parts of the world. He cares for Taiwan. He should care for Taiwan if he wants his chips secure, the microchips.
Right.
But I have not seen him care as much. So everybody.
I think he
is a
said some
little-
things about defense and how much Taiwan is spending on defense. I think he has a view of traditional U.S. allies very much as what he's talked about in the past.
Continue.
That, we have to keep funding these guys. We have to. Why are we thousands of miles away from home backing their defense? And why do we have to get involved in every conflict everywhere in the world? So I think there is that sense that perhaps on the question of Taiwan, he isn't as committed, and that opens him up.
They're jittery, but there will be a continuum on Taiwan. There certainly is going to be no continuum on Russia, Ukraine. And that he's made it very clear, right? Which is what Blinken and Sullivan were really invested in. I mean, if you had your advisors right, you had to be invested against Russia. But not to the extent that you forget where your real power comes from.
But, I think I do have to disagree a little bit on,
Yeah,
I think, Biden and the Biden administration's focus on China. I do think 100% that the invasion of Ukraine and then what happened in the Middle
there was
East.
a lot of diversion.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think definitely there was a lot of diversion. But I think in terms of the fact that they elevated the Quad, the fact that they put those far-reaching technology restrictions on the Chinese. They doubled down and kept Trump's tariffs. They kept those going. They did the AUKUS alliance. Passing nuclear submarines, one of America's most key technologies to an ally like Australia. No matter how close countries are, you don't hand your most prized piece of nuclear technology to someone.
Australia, you could.
Yes, unless you wanted them to do something on the China front, they were pushing us a lot to do that. So I do feel like there was that focus, of course. That was a problem with Biden.
I think it's
in
the other way around. It was Australia that was pushing America because they actually wanted it from the Brits. You remember?
I think from the French.
From the French.
Right.
And they did not. And then they got it from the Brits.
Right.
And, of course, the technology transfer with America. So it was Australia because Australia has been feeling the heat of Chinese aggression in the region. They are in the region, right? So it's not this way. It's the other way around, where there was enough push, Shashank, coming from Australia. They wanted...
But the fact that America was willing to transfer that technology...
And why did AUKUS happen? Because Quad could never become a military alliance. And why did that not happen? Because countries, particularly like India, did not want to confront China at a military level. So you are seeing reluctance. You are seeing Biden administration acquiescing to that to the reluctance and being accommodating of these concerns. On the contrary, I think if this was a time when Musk was not in if Musk were not in the picture, if Biden was not the president, and if Trump was the president for the second term, he would have continued with his China policy then. Because he was already going hard and hitting hard, right? And there he would have pushed Quad to become a military alliance. He would have said, why do you want an AUKUS? The formation of AUKUS, of course UK wanted in, but the formation of AUKUS in itself goes to show that there was reluctance. And the reluctance came because nobody wanted to ruffle feathers with China.
But nobody, you mean India specifically? Because I mean, no, because very frankly...
India very specifically, there is no doubt about that.
Right, because the point is often made when it comes to Quad that, look, Japan and Australia
also,
are already military allies of the United
But Australia
States.
was very careful. I mean, maybe they were careful when we would speak with the High Commissioner here that, this is an economic alliance, so on and so forth. They were careful maybe because they were keeping India's considerations in mind. But remember, Shashank, whatever they say, oh, India is being reluctant or India is weak. No, you are very far away. We are right there with China. You might not suffer the brunt of a Chinese military aggression. We do. So our considerations are very different from an Australia or Japan. Japan, of course.
And the military
feels the
capabilities
brunt.
of a Japan or
also
Australia
feels the
may be
brunt.
more limited as well.
Yes,
I think Japan
yes.
because of its history, Australia because of its population.
Also
and size
Japan
generally.
because Japan has the American backing. There is no way that America will not come to Japan's rescue.
Right.
But there is no guarantee that they will come to our rescue.
Okay. So now this brings us to India. It's a nice segue. We could leave our disagreements on the Biden administration's policy. Of course, that's history now. But the question I wanted to ask you really, of course, and the main focus, the main topic of this, the show was supposed to be on India and what this evolving relationship between the United States and China now means for India. There is a sense that, look, and very important leaders from India, including Foreign Minister S. Shankar, have said very clearly that, look, just to be cynical about it, the clash between America and China has been enormously beneficial for India in some senses, because that means that from the American side, you can say that America has always looked at India as, when it needs an alternative to China, as a balancing force. So, increased investments, transfers of defense technology, doing things like the Quad, placing India really front and center of its Asia strategy and Indo-Pacific strategy, has been because of America's concerns about China. One might also argue that China has been more accommodating in recent months to India's perspectives because, yes, its economy has slowed down, India's economy is doing decently, but also because of India's relationship with America, it does not want India to drift too close to the United States. And so it's saying, okay, let's on the border, let's see what we can do, let's disengage. So the sense is that actually we've done really well out of this US-China tension. And now if Trump decides to pull a little closer, reduce some of those tensions, reduce some of those disagreements, then India's relevance both to China as well as to the United States diminishes somewhat. And that leaves us in a difficult strategic position. Once again, I leave that argument to you. What do you make of that? Is this worrying? Would you worry?
It is. It is worrying. I completely agree with you on this one.
Yes. One. Got it.
It is worrying because what happened in the past, Shashank, was that having disagreements with China and having America closer, there was a flip side to it. And the argument then was that China is reacting to India getting closer to America. That all this that you're seeing at the border, that this tension that we're seeing, the hypertension that we are seeing at the border and in relations between India and China. And look, you said 24. You're talking about Trump and Xi Jinping. Similarly, the same scenario played out between India and China as well. They started off with this, what everybody called a bromance and the big hug, this, that, and the rest, right? And then you saw every time there was something that happened between India and China. Between the leaders, there was something that happened at the border as well. So every time you're seeing something good that happens between the two countries, you're seeing tensions. So this was messaging by Xi Jinping. And that was because we were getting close. That was the argument then. That why is this happening? What is the reason for this? Why would he, in one breath, say good things about India, and in the other, ask his soldiers to intrude or transgress, or go into Arunachal Pradesh, or pick up our soldiers? Things like that, or pick up our herdsmen, right? Things like that. So there. And that was the argument then. Then we saw that China and India were trying to make the relationship at least not as acrimonious as it had become.
Right.
And then the whole argument or the whole narrative that India plays a great alternative to China and supply chains.
Right.
But tell me on the ground, are we an alternative in the supply chain? Have we become one? We haven't. The reason why, despite all the tensions during Biden administration, and you were talking about the focus, right?
Sure.
Janet Yellen
The
was
Treasury Secretary of the
yes,
United States, right?
was in Beijing, and they got a deal. Exports have only increased manifold between between China and the US in terms of business trade.
Sure.
Jaishankar, in the initial phases of COVID and post-COVID phase, had said, we are cutting down this, we shut this down, we shut that down, we shut a lot of things down. And later, when data started coming out of trade between India and various countries, ours had doubled trade, and the trade deficit had
Continued to increase, right?
increased quite a bit because, of course, trade had doubled. And then Jaishankar said that we are still not there yet. We want to be an alternative to China, but we are not there yet. And we also need China. So we're not going to stop doing business because otherwise our economy will go down, right? So you're being realistic. There's one thing to create a narrative, one thing to say things out and look like you're being, you're being strong against China, and the other to be practical. And in this case, both America and India have been rather practical with China when it comes to trade, when it comes to how they want to engage. So we are not an alternative just yet. Are we going to be one? We aspire to be. Provided we have enough and there are no tensions that take a lot of our money and our budget into guarding our borders, which is what is happening right now.
Right.
But no active conflict as such really helps.
Can I ask you two brief questions
Yes,
before we close off? There is a theory, of course. I think I remember there's a great paper, I think, by Carnegie, by, of course, former ambassador Vijay Gokhale, who used to be foreign secretary. He wrote a fantastic paper once on China's India policy. I would recommend everyone go check it out. Where he said that, look, China does not view India as an independent, equal power that it needs to work with, right? When it thinks about its place in the world, it thinks about Russia, it thinks about America, thinks about itself. That's it. And to some extent, countries like Japan, because they're close to it. India doesn't feature as an independent player. They deal with India and give ground to India when they feel like, okay, we feel an international situation is developing against us. So some of the theory following from that is that because they were feeling a significant amount of pressure from America over the last 8 years, because they might have feared a Trump storm and a bunch of other geopolitical difficulties, their economy has not done so well. Because of all of those things and external pressure, the Chinese have decided to give some way on the border, be open to more engagement or disengagement on the border. And really, it's that fundamental driving factor of US pressure. And that is driving China to say, okay, we need to back off and not make an enemy of India at this point in time. Do you agree with that assessment? Because if that is correct, then that does mean that if that pressure disappears and the relationship between China and the United States stabilizes, that pressure decreases, then they will feel less need to engage with India, give ground on what India wants on the border. What do you make of that?
I don't go. I mean, yes, America is always a factor, but I don't think it is the only factor. It's a very small part of China's India strategy. It is an important one, but in the larger perspective, how close is India getting to America? What is it that India is getting from America? How will that help India counter China? Those are the larger questions that Beijing really focuses on. When it comes to the brass tacks of on the ground operations, I think they work very differently. It all depends on bilaterally where are we at right now. What is the factor that is an area of concern for China vis-a-vis India? Have we been too nice to the Dalai Lama? I mean, there's so many factors. What are the statements that are coming out on Tibet? Is it a BJP leader who said something on Tibet? I mean, everything is a trigger. It's a very complicated and multi-layered relationship. You can't just say that it is because of America, because it cannot be just because of America. America is just one factor.
So if I could ask you one last question then, when you talk about what happens now, of course, we're hearing reports that there may be a top-level meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping sometime very soon. Where also you agree that therefore there may be some worry in New Delhi as well as a number of global capitals around the world about what this US-China perhaps deal or reduction in tensions might mean. What can Delhi do in the meanwhile? Can it, for example, sit down and talk with countries like Japan, Australia, make sure that they're communicating with Washington and asking them to stay the course and remain broadly consistent with what America has been doing over the last couple of years? Can we communicate our concerns to Washington, or is it really that most of it is just going to come down to what those two gentlemen decide? Is there anything India can do, or is it going to have
No,
to wait?
I think it's more than that. India is a very, very important partner for DC, and the bigger meeting I think is going to happen in February between Modi and Trump. So even while they're looking at a Xi Jinping Donald Trump meeting, and yes, I do think Elon Musk is going to play a very important role in ensuring that they stay the course on that relationship and not really derail the process of engagement. Right now, it's a process of engagement, right? We are going to look at some very substantive talk between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. But that substantive talk is going to be a two-way process of positive and negative. You will hear Trump come out and say, well, I told him off on trade and all of that, He is going to be very, very hawkish on tariff. So we will hear that, but there will be some consistency on foreign policy and how that is pursued by America and India vis-a-vis China. That I don't think they're going to waver because there are too many country allies involved. Japan, Australia, the UK. They might not like Keir Starmer right now. Clearly so.
Right.
You've seen all the comments on Starmer, but they do know how important London is. And so they'll stay the course, and yet there will be some watching for the next few months for sure that India will have to do. New Delhi has to be very, very mindful of what's happening in DC. We need the right people at the right places. We need to engage and not be lost. We've been caught unawares on certain occasions diplomatically where we've seen governments fall and the High Commissioner or the envoys waking up to such a disastrous situation. That can't be the case with DC. So everybody is going to monitor it. We have some very, very bright America hands in Delhi as well as in DC. So, and very, very strong China hands, although I do believe that Vijay Gokhale, like you said, Shashank, has been the strongest China hand that they could have had. And even after retirement, he should have been retained in some capacity or the other. He didn't agree much, maybe is the reason why he's not there, but he is somebody who knows China inside out. So, and there are many others. So the very strong Vikram Misri, very strong
Current
China
Foreign
hand,
Secretary.
current foreign secretary, traveled to Beijing recently. So we have people monitoring DC and Beijing.
No, absolutely. That's fantastic. And I mean, just to close off before I deliver our formal end to the show, I would recommend, I mean, things that got us thinking about this, I mean, in terms of book recommendations, maybe we should do that as well.
Absolutely.
Things that we read, like I said, there's Ambassador Gokhale's...
Not just his paper, his book as well.
Right. It's called The Drivers of China's India Policy. It's by Carnegie India. You can check it out. There was a good piece in the Hindustan Times by Happy Mon Jacob on the India-China relationship, as well as the how the China-US detente sort of impacts India. Geeta, any recommendations in terms of what people should look at or read, maybe think
What
about?
was Vijay Gokhale's book?
It was... There are several books. There's one is Crosswinds, one is...
No, not Crosswinds. The last one on China.
There's India's China Policy, Tiananmen...
Not Tiananmen. Tiananmen was before. India's China Policy.
Right.
Right? That's the latest?
How China negotiates with India. How China negotiates with India, I believe that's the book. Right. So, Geeta, any recommendations from your end? What do you think?
I think going with the conversation and with the gentleman we spoke so highly of, Ambassador Gokhale must be quite glad. We should send him
I'm going to send him the link to this.
Just please do send him the link. The Long Game and Crosswinds, two books that are must reads on how India has dealt with China, and also you get a sense of how difficult a neighbor China has been.
Right.
How difficult it is to negotiate with China.
Exactly.
And how they come to the table, what they come to the table with.
Right. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for joining us for this episode. If you want to write into us, give us your feedback about this episode or any other episode we've done, you can reach out to us at 8588 966 996. That's the number. And you can also reach out to us by email on pods@indiatoday.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.